Finding faith, singing Good Hands here on Vision. Well, the conversation over this next hour is an adult conversation, so it may not be suitable for those with little ears. So if you want to shield them now or maybe give them something else to do, that would be a good idea. But today, we are going to put shame to shame. We're going to beat shame at its own game with a very special guest from the US of A. Bonny Burns is a Christian woman from the US and is the founder of an organization called Strong Wives. She wants people to flourish with determination, confidence, and discernment, understanding the love of God. But Bonny experienced her own heartbreak and sexual betrayal in her own marriage. And today she wants to discuss the trauma of shame that can affect even the victims of infidelity, as well as from a multitude of other sources, which can include the choices and decisions that individuals make. So Bonny works with and coaches primarily women and is currently in Australia speaking about problematic sexual behaviour and the traumatic impact it has on the partners. As I said earlier, she wants people to flourish, and she joins me in the studio today. Bonny Burns, all the way from Tennessee in the US of A. Welcome. Bonny, is this your first time in Australia?
It is.
So what brought Bonny Burns from Tennessee all the way to Australia?
It was a call, I believe, from God and from a good friend that we need more help here to understand problematic sexual behavior and the betrayal trauma and the consequences. And that's what I do. That's what my niche is. And so she asked me to come, and here I am.
So you didn't have the Macedonian man, you had the woman from Australia, the Aussie lady.
The Aussie lady from Billawilla.
From Billawilla saying, Bonny Burns, come over and help us. So you've been here now for about a week and you've been ministering in different settings. What's the reception been like?
It's been very warm and welcoming. I think there has been some eyes opened and just frank yet tasteful talk around sexuality, I think has been refreshing.
Yeah, look, I mean, you also host two podcasts. One of them is called Sex Chat for Christian Wives and another one, Hope for Wives. Let me ask, do you think, it's hard to generalize, isn't it? But in the church in America, for example, is it difficult to talk about sexual issues in the church?
I would say it is. It's probably not as difficult as here. But yes, there's still some taboo around it and just discomfort to bring it to light.
Yeah. And do you feel, or from your own experiences, that, sexual issues, particularly in marriage, are real deal breakers? They can actually be the cause of the end of marriages and relationships?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Problematic sexual behavior, infidelity, porn addiction. Yes, it can absolutely end a marriage, and biblically so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so here you are, Bonny Burns. How many years have you been working in this space, helping people in this area?
I've been working with marriages for over 20 years in my own ministry. I've been working as a credentialed coach that really specializes in this for 4 years.
Okay. And Bonny, you're quite open about it. You also suffered infidelity in your own marriage, the choice of your husband. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It was a problem for my husband for about 25 years. It would rear its head every once in a while. I would see it. This is called a discovery day. I've had several. But with the last discovery day, I realized my worth and value and my boundaries. And so I put some hard things in place that if he wanted to stay married, there were some recovery efforts that needed to be made.
Sure. Now, when you say Discovery Day, what do you mean by that? Discovery
Day is when the secret behavior becomes apparent. For whatever reason. It could be you stumble on an email. It could be a bank withdrawal. It could be a person telling you, hey, I saw something. But a discovery day is when the secret is revealed to you in some form or fashion.
And so how many years ago was your first discovery day?
My first discovery day was about 20 years ago.
Wow, that's a long time. And what was your reaction to your discovery day?
My reaction to the first discovery day was typical of most women who first discover. I dealt with a lot of shame. I took the blame for his problem. And I overfunctioned. I thought, if this is really around not meeting things in the bedroom, then I will fix that. Because if I can fix that, I won't be hurt again. So I took the blame. I did most of the work towards repairing the relationship at that time, which really wasn't my place to do that, but that's my faulty thinking. So that's what happened around my first D-Day.
Yeah, and so do you think that most, well, I say partners, could be men as well as women,
absolutely.
do you think it's a very human reaction to do what you did, to blame yourself, carry the shame, and try and fix it yourself?
Absolutely. And what we're seeing too is that trauma, which is what happens when you discover this deep, dark secret with the person that's supposed to be your person, there's a traumatic response. And we're seeing that trauma and shame are linked. So yes, it's absolutely normal that a person feels the shame, that they're covered in it.
Okay. So what are the other indicators or symptoms of the shame and the trauma that people are experiencing?
Biggest symptom is isolation. They just cocoon themselves off. They don't like to be in public. They don't like to interact with people, because if I interact and I can't tell my story because I feel this shame, then I feel like I'm a liar. I don't feel authentic. So there's a lot of different things going on, but isolation is the number one indicator of a lot of shame.
Okay. And so in your counseling and in your therapy, how do you try and get people out of that place of isolation? What's your encouragement to them?
Absolutely. There are actually specific groups of women which all these women are betrayed wives. So they're groups of betrayed wives. And I'm actually on the leadership of one. It's called the Sarah Society. It's a free Christian group that is trauma informed. And if you've been a betrayed wife, you can join that. And all the women in that group society get it. They get your pain. They get the shame. And it's a good space to be in because you don't have to put a mask on.
Yeah, okay. So it's finding groups of people on a shared journey who have that understanding.
Yes.
I think I've seen on Instagram actually another band, widows, who gather together as well and really go on a shared journey together, and it seems to really help them as well.
Mm-hmm. Widows, anyone with grief, yes, to be with a group of people who really get it. You don't have to always explain what you're feeling. It's validating and comforting.
Now, are some of these groups online, or are they always like physical meetings that people get together?
The Sarah Society is actually online, and we have women all across the world who've joined, even in Australia. We have
great.
We have several Australian ladies. And but they're online. There are groups that are in person, but that's going to be really specific to your location.
Yeah, okay. So, just in case someone's listening now and they're not going to be here in 45 minutes' time when you say goodbye and I get all your contact information, if someone wants to join one of those groups, the Sarah Society groups, how do they do that, Bonnie? What's the website they need to log on to?
Yes, it's sarahsociety.com, and you will have to register for a newcomer meeting so you can hear about how we operate and our guidelines. And once you go through the newcomers meeting, you have access to all of the Zoom meetings, to our Slack communication and our Marco Polo communication.
Excellent. So excellent. So that was sarahsociety.com.
Yes.
Great. Well, that's well worth checking out. Now let's talk about shame, because shame is something that affects a lot of people, not even people who've suffered infidelity at the hand of a trusted, intimate partner, but it's something that I think a lot of Christians deep down probably don't feel righteous, do they? They don't really feel like everything's right with God. And again, it's a subconscious thing that we tend to work out of this mentality. We need to do more. We're not quite good enough. We haven't quite kind of done enough for God yet. Mm-hmm. So what is your counsel around this space of shame? What do you tell people to get out of this trap?
Well, to get out of it, I think, first of all, you have to know the difference between the toxic shame, and there actually is a healthy shame. I mean, a healthy shame is what motivates us to live by our values, and that's a good thing. But the toxic shame, it is a visceral feeling of, I'll just say yuck, very technical term, yuck.
Yep.
But it's visceral. You feel it in your body, and the way to get out of it, the very first step is to acknowledge it, that what's going on with me, and then to self-assess, is my reaction of shame equivalent to where it came from? Because like if it's childhood abuse, A lot of times shame is wrapped around that. And it comes into adulthood because when you first experience that trauma, you're living in an undeveloped brain. And so children oftentimes feel everything is their fault. And so they bring that with them into adulthood, that was my fault and I'm bad. So that's toxic shame says, I'm bad, not that I've experienced something bad.
Yeah. So again, what's your counsel to people who are experiencing toxic shame?
It would be surrender that to Jesus. And we do know there's no condemnation for those in Christ. And that condemnation is shame. And that comes from Satan. He likes to keep us hiding. But my counsel is to talk about it. Really, it's that simple. Because if you can drag it into the light, it helps. Dragging things into the light helps eradicate Satan's hold on them because they're no longer a secret. A lot of times shameful things are secret things. So while I know it's uncomfortable to bring your experiences that created shame, it's uncomfortable to bring them to the light. But if you can find a safe friend, and that's why we have these groups, because all these women are safe. But if you can find a safe friend, and a safe friend means she's not judgmental, she's not going to give you any harsh criticism, she's just going to sit with you as you share these hard things, that's the first step.
Yeah, awesome. Because there's nothing worse, is there, than getting some of Job's friends in your world who, like potentially, let's pretend a man has an unfaithful wife. Mm-hmm. I think the narrative can sometimes be, well, what sort of a husband were you to make her do that? And it's not the counsel that you need. I've seen this, actually. I've witnessed this where people straight away blame the other partner. And like you said, you can't blame a wife. If a husband chooses to be unfaithful, he's broken his vows before God. You can't blame a wife for that, can you? Nor can you blame a husband if a wife decides to break her vows before God, because it's not biblical, number one, is it? Like, God didn't say do not commit adultery unless you got a bad marriage or your husband or wife are not perfect. It's something that people have to own for themselves. But so would you say the majority of people you deal with, they just can't get out of that feeling of shame after they've been cheated on?
I would say that 95% of them deal with it. Yeah, not everyone, but if you've had a lot of childhood trauma and then you have this betrayal trauma, it kind of exacerbates, it builds on top of each other, and it's really hard to get out of that shame because you already felt like you weren't worthy to begin with. And then the betrayal happens. And there is some of what was wrong with me. What did I do? How could I have stopped this? When, just like what you've said, it's not the spouse's fault that their partner cheated on them. That's a personal sin. They made that decision. A spouse doesn't have that power to make the other spouse go against their values. That's their decision and their choice. Absolutely.
Look at Joseph, when he was tempted by Potiphar's wife, who we're fairly certain was a very attractive woman, because the Egyptian leader of the army, my understanding is they chose their wives in public places and they chose the most beautiful. The elite of Egypt in those days got to choose the most beautiful women in the nation. So she would have been very attractive, and she was busting moves on him. She was doing everything she could to get him into the bedroom. And what did he say? He goes, how can I do this great sin against God? Mm-hmm. His first thought went to his relationship with God, his covenant with God, and that's why he chose not to be unfaithful in someone else's marriage. And so, yeah, it really is the individual who makes that choice, isn't it? They're breaking their vow before God.
Right. And, also Joseph fled, which in James we're told to flee from Satan. So not only did he say no, he fled. So yeah. there's a brain behavior, and there's the actual physical action.
Yeah. Well, if you're just joining us now, I have the great pleasure of having Bonny Burns with us in the studio today. She's doing a tour of Australia. She's been ministering in different churches and different groups and different settings. She's been here a week. She's going to be doing a men's breakfast tomorrow morning in the city that we're in right now, Brisbane, and she's speaking in a church on the Sunday. And we're talking about putting shame to shame. Bonny is a trauma therapist and a coach, and she helps people work through infidelity and trauma and just the shame and the guilt associated with that. And we're going to open up talkback lines now on 1-800 316 316. That's 1-800 316 316. Or you can even text us on 0447 488 316. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you got a story? Have you got a question for Bonny? Have you faced infidelity? And in fact, here's a good question. Have you faced infidelity and overcome it in some way? That may mean you've rebuilt a marriage. That may mean you've walked out of the marriage, but in a healthy, positive way with a forgiving heart, and you felt God actually allowed you to walk out of that for different reasons. We want to hear your stories today, or maybe you've got a question for Bonny about how to overcome shame, because today, one of the things we're really going to focus on after the break is we are going to put shame to shame in our lives.